David, thank you very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I want to spend the brief period of time I have with you to give you kind of a 30,000-foot view of what the Met Council is, the rationale for its existence, and also state what I think is equally important, what the Met Council isn't. I believe that it is legitimate and reasonable to have a limited form of regional governance, which is what the Met Council is. The jurisdiction of the Met Council encompasses the 7-county metropolitan area, and just to get a bit of definition on that, that's 3,000 square miles. Incidentally, 50% of that is agricultural or rural. The population of the 7-county region is 2.7 million, and we are on pace to add 1 million new residents by 2030. We are the fastest growing metropolitan region in the northern tier of states. I think it is very important to add that I feel strongly that the addition of the 1 million people to this region over the next 30 years is a good thing. Now that in some circles is controversial. I think it is great that we're going to grow by 1 million people. I think the wealth of this region, the vitality of this region, how dynamic it is predicated in large part on the growth of this region. All we have to do is compare ourselves to our friends in greater Minnesota. Many of the problems that they face result from a lack of growth. They result from people who want to leave various towns and municipalities in greater Minnesota. I think that is a more difficult and intractable problem than the problems that result from the growth that we are going to experience. But I think that on balance, that is a good thing. The Met Council, the core question that the Met Council attempts to work with our partners, there's 189 municipalities in the 7-county metropolitan region. The core question that we attempt to answer with those partners is, where are these 1 million people going to live? Do we have enough roads and transit options for those 1 million people? Are our parks adequate to address the needs of those 1 million people? Do we have enough wastewater treatment facilities and capacity for those 1 million people? Are our airports adequate to address those 1 million people? And I would submit to you that no one of those 189 municipalities could answer that themselves. I don't think Minneapolis can answer that question themselves. I don't think St. Paul or Lakeville can answer that question themselves. I don't think Maple Grove can answer that question themselves. In many respects, I think that is a question that requires somewhat of a regional perspective. I would argue, and I hope that we can get into this discussion, that it is beyond serious debate that different development patterns use infrastructure with different degrees of efficiency. I don't think that there, and again, if there is a debate about that, I would like to engage in it. The fact of the matter is that if you develop a region in certain ways, you will use roads, transit, wastewater, parks, aviation more efficiently. And many people argue, and I agree with those people that argue, that government needs to strive to be as efficient as it possibly can. But if you develop in certain ways, you will use roads more efficiently, you will use transit more efficiently, you will use your wastewater treatment facilities more efficiently, you will use your parks more efficiently than if you develop in other ways. And that, I think the goal of the Met Council is to balance two very important civic virtues. One civic virtue is the efficient use of very, very expensive infrastructure. The amount of money it takes to lay down a sewer pipe is hard to overstate. The cost of putting in a park is hard to overstate. The cost of 1 mile of highway is hard to overstate. To make sure that we use very expensive infrastructure very efficiently, that goal needs to be balanced with the right of local communities to determine their own destiny. I think that those are two very important civic virtues, and I think the Met Council is the place where those civic virtues, both of which have value, get worked out and attempt to get resolved. We try to strike, and many people would say we have, others would say we haven't, a delicate balance between those two civic virtues. The Met Council does essentially two things. We're involved in many activities. We have quite a large staff. We have a staff of about 4,000, a budget of about $600 million, though half of that is our transit budget, and 2,200 of those, actually it's about 3,800, are work in our transit system. We do two things. We operate the transit system for the 7-county metropolitan area. It's about the 11th largest transit system in North America, provides transit opportunities for, or provides about 70 million rides a year. We operate the transit system in the 7-county metropolitan area, and we operate the wastewater treatment system in the metropolitan area. Our wastewater treatment system is a world-class system. I am told that the water we put back in the Mississippi is cleaner than the water that is already there. And one of the reasons why the Met Council came together was the feeling we process wastewater for 106 of the 189 municipalities, that it was much more efficient to have a region-wide wastewater treatment system than to have all of the 189 municipalities developing their own separate wastewater treatment system. That to have some coordination of that activity would benefit directly the taxpayer and would bring a rationale to the delivery of that service. We operate the wastewater treatment system, we operate the transit system. In addition to that, we develop what's called systems plans for the 4 systems that I talked about: aviation, transportation, parks, and wastewater. And then the 189 municipalities develop comprehensive plans that outline how they are going to grow over an extended period of time using our systems, those 4 systems I mentioned a minute ago, as efficiently as possible. That's the core functions we do. We operate those 2 systems, and then we are involved in planning functions. We have had 4,000 of these comprehensive plans done since the council was started in 1967, and I believe that to a large extent that has benefited the region. Having said that, I do believe there was a fair amount of what I would term mission creep at the Met Council, in the previous Met Councils, that they went far beyond, I would argue, what their statutory responsibilities were, moving more aggressively into things such as affordable housing. We have, while I think that's important and that is necessary, that is not part of what I determine is our statutory directive. And so we have, I think it is fair to say, de-emphasized those issues. I would also argue that we have attempted to form a more collegial, less top-down relationship with the 189 municipalities in the 7 counties. I have spent a great deal of time and energy in working in that context with those municipalities. I think that is extremely important. One of the controversies of the Met Council, and here is an issue that I'm somewhat of an agnostic on, and with this I won't take up too much more time, is should the Met Council be elected? One of the more controversial aspects of the Met Council is we have taxing authority. We tax over $70 million out of the region's economy on an annual basis. We have bonding authority. The governor appoints the members of the Met Council. And I think you can construct an argument on both sides of that. Actually, I would not oppose legislation or an initiative to make the Met Council an elected body. I think there is some legitimacy to that argument. I think if it were an elected body, it would become very parochial in its interests, would be less able to take a regional focus, and that would dilute some of the original intent of the council. But I think the critics of the council that say we are unelected, I believe they have a point, quite frankly, and I think you could argue on both sides of that question. Let me end by talking a little bit about our transit activities, because I think they tend to be somewhat of the most controversial. And I believe transit is, and I want to be clear about this, a part of dealing with the problems of congestion in the seven-county region. I think the public is pounding the table, demanding that their elected and appointed officials do something about traffic congestion. It is growing almost exponentially. A few facts. In 1970, on average, we in this region took 2.7 trips per person per day. In 2000, we are taking 4.2 trips per person per day. In addition, each trip is longer. In 1970, the average trip length was 4.9 miles. In 2000, the average trip length is 6.5 miles. In 1970, people in the region took 5 million trips every day. In 2000, the region's residents took 11 million trips per day. In addition, because these trips are longer, the overall vehicle miles in the region have tripled from 18 million miles per day to 56 million miles per day. That's why you're sitting in traffic. I think transit is a piece of the puzzle. I think anyone who purely thinks traffic congestion can or only should be addressed through roads and bridges is wrong. I think anyone that thinks congestion should only be addressed through transit or a massive expansion of transit is wrong. I think we need a balanced approach to dealing with issues of traffic congestion, and the Met Council has attempted to do that. We have a goal of doubling our transit ridership over 30 years and having it grow 50% over the next 20 years. I think that is along with the significant expansion I think we need in our roadways, and I'm a big proponent of expanding our highway system. I'm a big proponent of congestion pricing for our highway system. But I do think transit has a legitimate role to play in dealing with our issues of congestion. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues.